Here's a really interesting story from antiwar.com, and it's rare to get good news these days, but this one is not bad. Montana becomes first U.S. state to pass resolution against unconstitutional wars. The Montana state legislature overwhelmingly passed a bipartisan and unprecedented resolution Tuesday calling on the federal government to end endless wars. The resolution passed 95-3 in the House and 47-2 in the Senate. House Joint Resolution 9, sponsored by Representative Ron Marshall, is the first of its kind to be introduced by any state and is currently being used as a model for other states across the country. The resolution specifically urges President Joe Biden and the United States Congress to, quote, end the endless wars in Afghanistan, end quote, repeal the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, resist sending U.S. troops into combat without a declaration of war from Congress or specific authorization to do so, and to, quote, execute a prudent foreign policy, end quote. Now, if I was that particular Representative Ron Marshall, who I think is a Republican from Hamilton, I think that's what R-Hamilton means, I'd probably maybe not drive one of those digital cars. I sort of think, to be against the endless wars is a very, very, very risky thing indeed. But, these things, this may take hold, and that's a great thing. Concerned Veterans for America and veteran-run organization endorsed the resolution and plans on utilizing it at the national level. The organization's deputy director, Russ Duerstein, said in a statement that, quote, the passing of the Endless War Resolution is a firm statement, a strong message on behalf of Montanans. There is a better way than continuing to fight endless wars, end quote. According to USA Today, Montana has the third highest percentage of veterans of all states in the United States. Well, I guess that's one reason they're probably doing that. A recent YouGov and Concerned Veterans for America poll also determined that two-thirds of all U.S. veterans support the complete withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. But who cares what the public think, right? Most people want Medicare for all. Quote, our troops have served valiantly in Afghanistan and elsewhere. I don't know if you can really say valiantly when really why were they there? Why were they there? And the Taliban is basically now everywhere. And there were dopey reasons to go there in the first place. They were just it was just the whole thing, the war on terror, that's just complete as a made-up reason that you can take everywhere, and it's forever. You can make up that anybody is a terrorist if you want to, and you just need the fourth estate behind you, manufacturing consent. So our troops have served valiantly in Afghanistan and elsewhere, but perpetual war and fruitless nation building is not in America's best interest, end quote. Duerstein added. I guess he didn't get the memo from the U.S. National Security State. Quote, worse, endless conflicts marginalize the service of those who have sacrificed for our freedom. This sort of language is really odd to me. Sacrifice for our freedom. Seriously. We owe our military community better, and we thank Representative Marshall and Senator Bogner for leading on this measure and commend all those who showed their support for it, end quote. Anyway, I think I'll leave that link for this article, and you can check it out. It's an interesting article at antiwar.com, which is another interesting site that is worth following. And we need more antiwar.coms. We need more anti-imperialist journalists. That's so important. We have great ones at the moment, but we need more. And speaking of anti-imperialism, I came across a site yesterday, which I think I may have already been aware of, but I forgot about it. IPAN, and it's Independence and Peaceful Australia Network, I think it's called. And basically, it's an anti-war group. And I wasn't aware of them. I wasn't quite aware of them, but I think I might have seen that name around somewhere. And I'm hoping that they connect up with other anti-war groups across the world, because it's very, very important that we become internationalists. Otherwise, we're all just, these little tiny groups. It's an international struggle against U.S. empire. And I'm hoping that this group, IPAN, is actually is a good group and isn't sort of like very protective about its status and is sort of not into networking and stuff like that, which is sometimes what you find with various groups, that they're so they're very much into their own identity and they don't want to work with other people. So that was good to see. He's a professor, I think he's a professor, Professor Sachs, and he gives this great pushback on the BBC when they try to, instead of talking about the climate crisis, they start to go on about China and their human rights abuses. And I think his name is John Sachs. He pushes back on this and says that this is so ridiculous that the US is committing atrocious human rights abuses abroad and at home. And here you are pointing out China and saying, well, I don't know if we should work with China on the whole climate crisis thing because they're human rights abusers. It's a really good little segment, and I'll show that.
The Biden administration has been strongly critical of China's actions on human rights, but engaging on climate change. Do you see that as a strategy that can actually work?
I'm not sure why BBC started with listing only China's human rights abuses. What about America's human rights abuses? The Iraq War, together with the UK, completely illegal and under false pretenses. The war in Syria, the war in Libya, the continued sanctions against civilian populations in Venezuela and Iran, walking away from the Paris Climate Agreement for the last 4 years. Unilateral trade actions that have been deemed illegal by WTO. So one can make anything one wants, but we have really serious human rights violations by the United States abroad, not to mention in insurrection on January 6th in our own country, not to mention the continued massive racism, white supremacism, and abuse of incarceration of hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S., Black, African-American, people of color. So I think that the whole premise of this story is a little bit odd.
No, but sorry, I'm looking. If I may, we have to look at.
I found the framing of it not what I expected. I thought we were going to talk about climate change, which we should. But I think that the idea that there is one party that is so guilty, how can we talk to them, is just a strange way to address this issue.
Well, hang on. Sorry, Jeffrey, if I could come, Jeffrey, I'm hoping we can have a conversation. I'm hoping we can have a conversation. And if I could just say, I'm using, and what I'm saying back to you here is, we're also using the framing of the Biden administration. We're also talking from the perspective of how Joe Biden himself and those around him have talked about the human rights abuses in China. So you know, sorry, just to say,
always, excuse me for one moment. The U.S. always attacks other countries. It holds itself sacrosanct. It's really outrageous, because I know what goes on in American foreign policy, and I know how abusive it is, and I know what it's like to live in a racist society, which I happen to do, where a significant part of this country is racist, followed a racist president who led an insurrection on the Capitol. And so the framing of this issue is strange. That's what I'm saying.
What, by your own country as well as the rest of the world? I believe
by the government, not by my own country, by the government of my country. So I believe that the two leading polluters absolutely need to clean up their act. This is crucial for the sake of the world. And so, of course, we need to clean up our act, because the United States is emitting 15 tons of CO2 per person in this country, twice what China is emitting per capita. And the two countries together are about 40% of the CO2 emissions in the world, and we are wrecking the climate.
And speaking of imperialist pushes, manufacturing consent, and this is in Australia, I was watching this professor, Meinheimer is his name, and he's going around the world pushing a war on China. And he does this really repulsive talk at one of the Australian think tanks, basically one of the neocon warmongering think tanks. The few that we have here, we have a number of them, and they're influential, like the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is rapidly pushing a war on China. This one is not that. not that particular think tank, but it may as well be, because it's doing the same thing. I want to show you this little bit from Professor Meinheimer, because it really gives you an idea of what a vassal state Australia is, that somebody can basically come over here and talk to an audience, and you can hear people laughing in the audience, which I find is amazing, because basically he's saying to the audience in Australia that, you know, you have two choices. You can either be with the US or against the US. And if you're against the US when it comes to their saber rattling against China, if you're not with the US, then you can basically end up like Cuba. That's it in a nutshell. So he's basically saying, it's a sort of a very, this is how the US treats Australia, basically. And all the politicians here, all of them just basically toe the line of what the US dictates is our foreign policy. We follow the foreign policy of the US, and whatever wars they want to drag us into, we go along with it. So basically, this this Professor Mannheimer is, telling Australia, and other, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute is the same, basically telling Australians that if you don't go along with the US with its saber rattling and its inevitable war on China, it looks like it's inevitable. If you don't go along with that, then you are going to pay. You're going to pay big time. And all the politicians here just submit to that. I guess in one way they value their career over actually pushing back. And even the independents, I don't really hear anything from them either. So to actually talk about US imperialism and the endless wars in Australia, if it's media, if it's any politician, it's like it's verboten. You do not talk about it. And that has to change. It has to change, because basically, apart from the fact that we're a part of this destruction of Western Asia, we're basically, terrorizing women and children and men that are just living in Iraq or in Afghanistan or wherever else. There's so many wars going on, it's hard to keep track. Apart from that, we're actually heading headlong. US is dragging us into a war on China. They are dragging Australia into a war on China. They're our closest neighbours. And, China could just roll over on us anytime they wanted to, really. And why wouldn't they? If we're joining in on this atrocious saber-rattling and imperialist war to try and destroy China, the Chinese are not going to put up with that. And so we've actually been paying economically for this idiotic war, this idiotic warmongering against China. We've just gone into it. We were getting along great with China, and then suddenly the pivot to Asia happened, and then everybody had to fall in line after Barack Obama said, there's a pivot to Asia, meaning they're going to start focusing on China and trying to see if they can isolate China, which is funny. And also they're warmongering against them. They're saber-rattling all the time, this provocation, which could lead to a complete world war, because the Russian government is not going to stand back and let China fight its own battle, because everybody that hasn't submitted to the US is in danger of that sort of thing. The US just picks countries off one by one. So that's why different countries now are joining together, like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, are all getting together because it's the safest thing to do. And basically this professor said to the Australian audience, well, you can go with China or you can go with us, but if you go with China, then expect to become like Cuba, and expect that you'll be victimized for that. It's just this US empire, and I call it an empire because it's got 800 bases worldwide. It's overthrown many, many governments, many, many countries since World War II, 50 plus. It's an appalling empire that is insatiable and basically wants full spectrum dominance. And the CIA is basically the invisible army of capitalism, and it's all basically to serve the 1%. These wars are really to serve the 1% and to serve the capitalist aims. That's why capitalism is inextricably linked with imperialism, and fascism is capitalism in decay. So, this is something that Australians are going to have to really start to we're going to, no offense to invertebrates, but we're going to have to start to grow a spine, these politicians, and push back. And, take a leaf out of Montana's book and start to question what's going on. We're going to Australia's going to end up in this war against China, and the US is far away from China across the Pacific. We are right on the doorsteps, really, of China, and if China decided, well, we'll start bombing Australia, we'd be finished in no time. No time. And who wants to be involved in this appalling imperialism? You know, we're being dragged into these wars, just one war after another, that has nothing to do with us or anybody, really. So anyway, I'll show you this little excerpt, and it just gives you an idea of the arrogance. And this, I bet you if you look at this guy's bank account, Professor Mannheimer, I bet you he's getting dark money from somewhere, or just straight up money from the weapons industry, just like the Australian Strategic Policy Institute is funded by the weapons industry, by Lockheed Martin, and the like. You know, they're all funded by weapons industries, these think tanks. They're all neocon warmongering think tanks. And this is what our government here in Australia, relies on them for information, knowing that they are funded by the weapons industry, knowing that they are just representative of US foreign policy.
Now, the question is, what does this all mean for Australia? You're in a quandary for sure. Everybody knows what the quandary is. Security-wise, you really want to go with us. It makes just a lot more sense, right? And you understand that security is more important than prosperity, because if you don't survive, you're not going to prosper. Survival is of the utmost importance, because you can't pursue any other goals if you don't survive, right? So security's got to be number one. So you'll sacrifice prosperity for security, right? That's what will happen. That's why you'll be with us. Now, some people say there's an alternative. You can go with China, right? You have a choice here. You can go with China rather than the United States. There's two things I'll say about that. Number one, if you go with China, you want to understand you are our enemy. You are then deciding to become an enemy of the United States. Because we're talking about an intense security competition. You're either with us or against us. And if you're trading extensively with China and you're friendly with China, you're undermining the United States in this security competition. You're feeding the beast from our perspective, and that is not going to make us happy. And when we are not happy, you do not want to underestimate how nasty we can be. Right? Just ask Fidel Castro.
And lastly, I wanted to show you, and I'll probably show you in a separate video, there's two videos I saw related to Palestine. One is that Palestine is in terrible shape, as you would expect, during this COVID pandemic, because the Israeli government is basically doing a wonderful job rolling out the vaccine for Israeli citizens, but Palestinians they're basically ignoring. And not only are Palestinians not under-vaccinated terribly, but now they're running out of oxygen. And there's many thousands of Palestinians now who are being treated for COVID-19. And they basically need about, I think he said about 3,000 litres or something of oxygen a day. And they only have less than half of that. So I'm not sure. I'm going to see if there's some sort of a organisation, a charity that one can donate to so that maybe they can access more oxygen. But I mean, this is just appalling. This is medical apartheid. But this is what it's like in the apartheid state of Israel. Basically hoping, I guess, that Palestinians die of COVID. Just one more awful thing that they're doing to Palestinians. And the other thing I wanted to show you, and I'll probably do this in a separate video, this woman who's a Palestinian, she basically has moved into a cave because she says, you know, the Israeli government just keeps basically bulldozing Palestinian homes and then building it's illegal. UN has cited that this is illegal to do, basically building on top of these bulldozed homes. And the UN has basically been for decades saying this is an illegal activity, but the Israeli government just keeps doing it and helping the Israeli illegal settlements to take place. And this Palestinian woman basically said, I'm tired of this happening, and she's moved into a cave because she said they can't bulldoze the cave. I mean, this is how appalling it is. So anyway, I'll see if I can, I will probably do this in a separate video. And I'll see if I can find a charity that is a reliable charity where people can donate so that Palestinians can get basic medical resources like oxygen during COVID. Because they're certainly not going to get a vaccine in any timely fashion, if at all. The Israeli government is refusing, basically, to vaccinate Palestinians. And if you're an anti-masker and you're on this channel, you've certainly come across the wrong channel. Anyway, so I'll leave it here. It's getting very windy now. So thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Viga. Bye for now.